Yeah.
I'm a consultant plastic surgeon. I've been a doctor for the NHS for 30 years. I have been working with a charity called Ideals since 2018, who regularly go to Gaza to help train local Palestinian surgeons. And I have been going with them since then. When the war started on October the 7th, Ideals was registered with the United Nations and the WHO EMT as an emergency medical team and started sending missions back to Gaza. We've attempted 21 missions now, and I think we've had 14 successful missions. I was on a mission in March to the European Gaza Hospital for 2.5 weeks, and then a mission in August for a month at NASA. And then I went back in May, June for another mission to NASA. I suppose the things that I can talk to you about really are the things that I've directly seen. And in terms of things that have been totally unacceptable during this war have really been the number of children injured. I think UNICEF have recently estimated this as 50,000 in Gaza, and when you compare that to 2,400 in Ukraine, you start to get a picture of what's going on. The mortality rate for a child during the war in Ukraine is estimated to be 0.7%, and that for a child in Gaza is 37.7%. I was operating on children every day, and during my last mission I would run a list of 10 to 12 patients, and the first 6 would be under the age of 15. And these are children that have suffered blast injuries, so they have either been burnt by the heat or the fire caused by the explosion, or they have been directly hit by the explosion, or they have been hit by shrapnel, so anything around them when the bomb went off is then whipped up and ejected at very high velocity and hits them. So we were seeing children with bits of their body blown off, essentially. I have some images. I don't know whether you want to see them, but just for the record, I looked at one day's operating in May, and we operated on 6 children. We started with an 18-month-old child, that's not the youngest child I treated, with a 15% burn. We then went on to a 3-year-old boy with a 35% burn. In the UK, that is a 50-50 survival burn, and it would go to probably one of only 2 units that would be able to look after that child. I then operated on a 5-year-old girl who had had her arm blown off. She was down for an amputation, but we managed to salvage half of her hand and most of her forearm and shoulder. I then operated on her sister, whilst my colleagues operated on her mother in the theatre next door. Her sister had had her left cheek and shoulder blown off. I then operated on a 7-year-old girl who had had her knee blown off. And my final case was a 13-year-old boy who had had his left ankle blown off, and his brother was being operated in the theatre next door. I think it's not just the children that we were operating on that affected us, but also the restriction in aid. And obviously lots of people talk about the malnutrition, which I will get onto briefly, but for doctors working in Gaza, we are restricted in lots of ways. The first ways in which we're restricted is actually gaining entry to Gaza. Before the Rafah border closed in May, we had very easy access through Cairo, across the Sinai Desert, through the Rafah border, and then we would be picked up by Palestinian colleagues and taken to our respective hospitals. There was no restriction on what we brought with us or the number of people that travelled with us. We just had to register with the WHO everything that we were bringing with us and who the doctors and nurses were. Once Israel and Kogat took control of entry and exit into Gaza, the situation changed and we were limited to 2 convoys a week. One would go in and come out on a Tuesday and one would go in and come out on a Thursday. It was one bus. There were 35 seats on it and you had to apply for your seat a month or 6 weeks in advance, and you were told 2 weeks in advance whether you were on it or not. And then you made your way to Amman, and the night before it was due to leave, you were told by Kogat whether you would be permitted entry or denied entry or banned from entering. You are only allowed to take 1 bag with you on that bus, and it has to weigh 23 kilograms. You have to take all your food with you for the month and water for 3 days. You are not allowed to take any medical equipment. You are at the moment limited to 1,000 shekels in cash. You're not allowed to take more than 2 mobile phones, 1 computer. The issue that we have now is that since the ceasefire collapsed, the convoys are cancelled on a very regular basis. We would now estimate that nearly 60 to 90% of all doctors, this is specifically people that put their name down as a surgeon, anaesthetist or physician, are denied entry, and the WHO can give you information on that. We have recently had 3 major charities that were sending missions into Gaza on a weekly basis, deregistered by Kogat. That is Medical Aid for Palestinians, Rahma and PalMed. These are amongst apparently 32 organisations that have recently been deregulated by Kogat. As well as the entry of doctors being extremely hampered, so is the supply of medical equipment. Obviously, you are taking a risk if you take equipment into Gaza, because if it is found by Kogat at the Allenby border, you run the risk of you being denied entry, but also the entire team that you're with being denied entry. Very little supply gets to the hospitals at the moment. Some of the big NGOs have managed to get a few trucks in, but not enough to keep us stocked. When we were there, we ran out of analgesia, which meant that, unlike in the UK, when we amputate your leg, we'll give you some anaesthesia, some local anaesthetic into the stump so that you don't wake up in pain. We were not able to do that. So every day that I operated, the first 6 cases would be children, and the screaming in the recovery room would not stop until about 3 in the afternoon, and we had no analgesia to give those children. We also ran out of antibiotics. We had 2 types left, neither of which would be indicated in dirty open war wounds. We ran out of disinfectant solutions, which we ended up having to water down, and we ran out of scalpel blades, which we ended up having to re-sterilise. With regard to restriction of food, obviously the malnutrition is very evident now in the images that are getting out. I think we really noticed it in our colleagues initially. All of them had lost weight. All of the team that I went with lost weight. I lost 1/2 stone in 28 days. I didn't see any fresh fruit or vegetables. I only ate the food that I took in with me. There was nothing else available. But I think malnutrition affects you in multiple other ways, and certainly we know that it enhances low mood and increases tiredness, and we really did see that amongst our Palestinian colleagues. Amongst our patients, probably the hardest thing was immunosuppression. So without adequate nutrients and vitamins, you don't mount the response, the immune response that you would need to. And so we were seeing a lot of preventable illnesses. And certainly at the moment, we know that there has been a sharp rise in an enterovirus causing diarrhea and vomiting. And what we have seen now is because of poor immunity, it has triggered an autoimmune response, something that we know as Guillain-Barré's syndrome, which means that you then make antibodies to your own nervous system. That starts with paralysis to the sensory nerves, so you get tingling and numbness, and then it progresses to skeletal muscle, and you get flaccid paralysis. As that flaccid paralysis rises, once it affects the diaphragm, that will stop you breathing, and then you die. We do see this in the UK, but it's very, very rare. Prior to the war, the Ministry of Health reported 2 cases per year in Gaza. The WHO last month reported 37 cases in people under the age of 15. And then lastly, just to talk about targeting the healthcare system, I am a colleague of Adnan Birch. He came to King's College to work with our team there, our orthopaedic team. I knew him well, and as you know, he was murdered during this war. I am also a colleague of Mohammed Al-Obeid's, who is still missing, and we cannot find his location. Multiples of my colleagues reported to me that they had been rounded up at Shifa and Nasser Hospital and held at gunpoint. One of my colleagues, Ahmed Maghrabi, told me that his theatre nurse was shot whilst he was standing next to him. My anaesthetist at Nasser was taken from Shifa and detained for a month. He told me that he was held with a bag over his head and his arms tied behind his back. He lost 1.5 stone in weight. He also reported that he was beaten every day.
Dr. Victoria, can we ask you a question?
Yes.
Jeremy? I can
Yeah,
ask you.
when you're trying to get into Gaza, how long do you often have to wait in Amman before you know if you're on this bus or not, or get in at all? Or how does the process work, and how many doctors don't get in?
The process is run by the United Nations WHO EMT, but they only control their access, so you know that they've given you a seat 2 weeks before you arrive. The final approval is given by COGAT, and it can come any time the day before you leave. It will never come before you leave, but it will never come before you arrive in Amman. You have to be in Amman, and then they will confirm that you're there, and then COGAT will say whether or not you can get in. The latest we were told was in February of this year at 10 o'clock at night, the evening before we were due to leave. We were told the whole team had been denied entry.
When you're limited on the food you take in, how on earth do you survive on only 23 kilos over a period of several weeks?
I won't lie, I don't really stick to that rule, because I sort of know that they won't weigh the bag per se. So we do bring larger bags and put as much as we can in. To be honest, we survive on reconstitutable packet foods, the sort of thing that you take camping, like porridge, something that you can just put boiling water into, and you just take as many. You take one for dinner and one for breakfast, and that's all you take really, and some cereal bars. The rest of my suitcase normally is full of things that I'm taking for my colleagues. So when we first went in March, my colleagues asked me for mobile phones and chargers. When I went in August, there had been a blockage of sanitary products by Israel getting across to Gaza, and nobody had any soap or shampoo or toothpaste. So my colleagues asked me to bring them those items. When I went in May and June, my colleagues asked me to bring them energy bars and multivitamins.
And the UK government, has it supported your work? Has it put obstacles to the kind of work? Has it been present at all in these kinds of humanitarian initiatives by UK medical teams?
I would say I am absent, probably. I think that the UK government possibly had no idea how many of us were going to Gaza until the most recent trips in May and June, when we came back with footage of the malnutrition. And that's the first time that we've managed to meet with the UK government. We, as a body with the International Centre for Justice of Palestine, had written to Hamish Faulkner, well, we'd written to David Lammy and Keir Starmer initially in November 2024. We had no response for many months, and then Hamish Faulkner wrote back to us, and then we had nothing. We have emailed and irritated several MPs and parliamentary aides, and recently myself and my colleague Nick Maynard and some other colleagues of ours have had a Zoom call with the Prime Minister. We have met Hamish Faulkner face to face, and we've met Wes Streeting face to face.
And have these meetings led to any proactive actions by the UK government?
Not that we've been informed of, no.